Ah, well, we finally finished volume one of Hans Urs Balthasar's 7 volume series, Glory of God of Theological Aesthetics, and we're now on to the much slimmer, and I think we both agreed much easier to read second volume, uh, Studies in the Theological Style, Clerical Styles, because the next one is Lay Styles. Uh, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed this volume. I thought it was way more accessible, and it seemed to not go into this like esoteric language that was hard to follow. Um, you know, it was easy to read in a way. I mean, I don't think it'd be easy to read for like some people, but I mean, if you have background in philosophy or theology or literature, it was very clear. It was the approach here made sense to me in a way that volume one didn't. And I, not that I didn't like volume one, I enjoyed it, but it was a lot of head scratching and a lot of rereading lines and saying, I think I understand this. And then realizing maybe I didn't understand it. I didn't have any moments like that with this one.
Yeah, and just the format is, introduction, and then he goes through various theologians, beginning with Saint Irenaeus, and then finishing with Bonaventure, who I was just checking. He gets actually the longest amount. He gets the most pages, Bonaventure, which kind of surprised me. But Irenaeus is kind of known for being pretty dense because he's like goes over like most of what we know about the Valentinian Gnostics comes from him and his writing what they were saying and then explaining why he thought it was wrong. And he's not doing like a summary, so he's not getting the whole thing, but nonetheless he makes a notably dense theologian accessible. So yeah, but I'm going to give a couple quibbles. And I'm going to like page 11, which is the first bit of the book. Because the introduction. The first volume attempted to show that one can and must consider the revelation of the living God as the Christian understands it, not only from the point of view of its truth and goodness, but also from that of its ineffable beauty. Okay, now there is the hedging of attempted. Did he show that? I'm not sure, because one of our closing discussions was about how much he really goes into what might be considered traditional aesthetics in volume one, the ineffable beauty, and how much is it. Like, I came to the conclusion it was as much an embodied epistemology. I got stuck on this idea of form as a kind of extension or extrusion, into space, into time, into history. Whenever we saw something about art and beauty, we got kind of excited, like, oh, hey, there's a bit of this. Like, oh, nope, he moved on. So,
Yeah,
that caught me there. Like, I'm not sure you did that.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that, as we're just talking about, volume one was really more about training or helping you to see properly, see creation properly, and recognize everything's sort of grounded in God. And I did notice, I mean, some of the threads that were kind of arising in volume one were coming up here in a way that was more complete. I remember in our previous discussions, we had mentioned that he seems to be mildly critical of Christian Platonism. And in this volume, I think that's just very obvious. Like, he comes out and says it.
He practically says it's heretical.
Right. So, so again, this felt more satisfying in a way because I got these answers. I mean, his treatment of Irenaeus was actually really helpful for me because I haven't read much Irenaeus. I know that quote where it's just like, well, yeah, no, like a couple quotations from him, but just like really sitting with his ideas. I thought von Balthasar really elucidated them really well. Maybe want to read Irenaeus. And I thought, again, I thought his, well, I guess I should say, I'm not sure how much, when we were seeing the kind of extended argument against Gnosticism, was that von Balthasar or was that von Balthasar channeling Irenaeus? So that was something that I was thinking about too.
It's something we saw in the last one too. Like sometimes just wasn't clear because he also uses long quotes, and then sometimes you see like the double quotation marks, the single quotation marks, and honestly, I could have done more of going through the footnotes and all, but I'm not trying to be that. One thing I do want to note is that this is a different translator, and I think they do have a more elegant style. But also, there is a danger of that maybe some terminology is a little different. That might be some of where it diverges in the first one. But like you mentioned, the Plato comes up, form comes up, recovering gnosis as knowledge, and link it to revelation. This even throughout a whole chapter about the saint who knocked down the Gnostics. It's less a common. The word, appears in a positive sense, gnosis or some version of it, less often here, but it feels more assertive when it does appear. That he is like, gnosis is key. And I do interpret gnosis here as a kind of revelatory knowledge, but assured revelatory knowledge. He talks at one point about ecstatic visions.
Right.
And he really is like, I'm not talking about that, that this may be mystical and experiential rather than rational, but it is not it is not a hippy dippy, I saw Christ on a grilled cheese. This is, this is gnosis as legitimate knowledge.
Right. And I really appreciated toward the end of the reading, he really goes through great pains to talk about how, for at least Irenaeus and perhaps von Balthasar, human beings need to be kind of educated into wisdom and kind of educated into seeing reality. And I thought that was really important. I mean, I want to highlight an actually particular phrase that stood out to me.
There was some beautiful passages on education and development in relation to Adam and humanity that I appreciated.
Yes, I thought it was, and again, like I think, when you mentioned the translation, the shows just how much translation matters, and just making things clear for people. This is obviously not.
Maybe page 78. I see some notes I have here that maybe might be about what you're talking about.
Let me see here. There's something, I think it's like a bit later. But while I look for my quote here, again, I just want to mention the importance of translation because, I've seen it in other areas, where, for instance, I teach Aristotle's ethics, and I've often seen with Aristotle is that he sort of translated into this like early modern English speak, and that, because just people assume like, oh, this is like somebody from ancient Greece, therefore he has to sound like an Elizabethan Englishman. So that kind of makes it hard to.
The Loeb editions with so many of the Greek and Latin translated by Benjamin Jowett. I think that his early 20th century translations have done so much to set how we think Aristotle and Plato and all those guys sounded.
Yes, and I think that recently I found a new translation of the ethics that's done in clear language, and it just changes the experience of reading Aristotle, because you can say, "Oh, I understand this. Oh, this is not written in a way that is trying to go over my head," and it makes sense, because it's like Aristotle is all about practicality and and etc. So that's why, again, I think this translation is successful here.
I have such an affection for these old Loeb ones that do have the antiquated language. Just aesthetically, I love the volume. So part of me is always going to stick with them, and that's going to lead me in the realm of that language. But like I also with Proust, I tend to prefer the old Scott Moncrief translation, even though I've been told a million times that it's not great.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm still looking what I want to find, but I think we should talk about 78, because I think that there's a lot of stuff there that's important. You know, man behaves like a child and acquires wisdom only slowly by experience. And I thought this was what was really interesting about this section here, is that the fall was presented in a way that was positive, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I thought that, you know, again, you can do a variety of readings on the second creation story in Genesis, but here it was like the fall was necessary for us to show how much we needed God's grace, and I thought that was really interesting. I don't think I'd seen something like that before.
No, it's. I mean, yeah. I wonder how controversial that is. Yeah, that was really fascinating. That this positive view of the fall and linking it to an idea of education, and again going back to a key concept. The first line was this experiential nature of this ascetic / revealed knowledge.
Right. Right, exactly. And again, I mean, like, I think, yeah, I agree. Like, I'm not sure how controversial it is, but I thought that this was, again, it's really interesting. I mean, just to pull again from that page, um, there's a quotation here. I'm assuming he's pulling from Irenaeus. A sight would not be so desirable to us if we had not learned how awful it is not to see. The health becomes more prioritized by the sick as a result of experience and light by comparison with darkness and life and death. So again, like, we don't, like, if I were to go blind, right, I would miss being able to see, because I don't have that absence. But I thought this was just a profoundly interesting. And I thought too that he, I think we see in the next page here, this is something that actually stood out to me as well. He talks about, particular languages, approaches to the senses and everything, and he departs from origin a little bit. He does that a couple times.
And he calls out origin very specifically.
Yeah, I know. I remember toward the end of the reading on Irenaeus, he talks about, like, Origen's approach to hell. He seems to disagree with that, and then, but here, he says, even for the spiritual man, the experience of existence is close to the earth in the world of the senses. What Origen will later call the spiritual senses, and as a Platonist sharply distinguished from the physical senses, is for Irenaeus the man of earth's original and abiding sensitivity to the taste of things, the good and bad. It is not until Claudel that a similar language reappears in Christianity. So, besides, again, I'm really just appreciating what you had to say there. I thought this volume also did a lot to show us how different approaches and different language of theology and Christianity has sort of been in vogue, I guess you could say, at different times. So I thought that was just really interesting.
And there's like a section he talks, about early Christian theology, these patristic era being non-Platonic, of not having the Platonic view, and then Augustine, I think a Regent got named up there too, adding it. And it's definitely for him still a negative. It's still kind of one of the things that come up. And he's almost the first volume, he was more of defiantly non-Platonic.
Right.
Here, there's some more specifically anti-Platonic on 67. Both the Gnostics again later for Augustine, the distinction between wheat and chaff in the church, a static character in the sense of two classes of people, whereas the reign is determined by position, organic process of growth. So this education and experience versus kind of a more dualist, almost Calvinist, more this process of achieving salvation and grace. And then later down on the same page, 67, thus Platonic or Gnostic views of being, which break it up into a useless part which runs away into time, and the timeless part, which is the only valuable one, completely destroy and distort. Anyway, he's saying this is contrary to the hylomorphism, the soul and body being intrinsically connected. That's so vital to Christian Catholic theology and Plato called out that Platonism is contrary to that.
Right.
There are a couple other caves I saw where kind of like that, the Plato's cave allegory of the forms and the two worlds, as it were, really gets called out in favor of a strong sense of hylomorphism that's not just thinking of the nature of the soul, but is body throughout. He talks a lot about on the page before, human nature is seen as all along embedded in time and becoming. There's a lot of talk of Christianity, Irenaeus being historical. The Christian reality is inseparable from history. Of this embeddedness that was really in the first volume, that this salvation and understanding of God so embedded in an historical context.
Right. I remember the quote I wanted to highlight. I'm still trying to find the page. I just don't remember what it is. But yes, here it is. I found it. Perfect. Well, I mean, there were a few. Do you remember what page it was on where it was like theology is seeing reality as it is? Because when I saw that, I went yes, and I wish I could remember the page, but I thought that was just really, really good to say.
Actually, somewhere a wonderful definition of theology that really kind of well, hopefully I'll find it, but it was like a wonderful summation of what theology is that I've rarely seen before.
Right, and again, it was because what I appreciated about it is that again, oftentimes the experience of faith is seen as this kind of again, fantastical thing. It's something that is sort of invented for us, that we can sort of escape from reality, but that's obviously not true, and that's in fact the opposite of it. And again, I thought his stating of this was just really, really good, and I thought that and that's something else, I guess, about this volume too, that again, it's probably a translation thing, but the claims didn't feel like the claims felt direct. It didn't feel like he was kind of dancing around something or saying like where's this going? Right? There was a lot of lines where it's just like this is this, and so I appreciated that.
Yeah. And there is some new language. Image seems to come up a lot here.
Yes.
The word image that didn't occur so much, and it does make sense because, and we saw in the last one, he was really obsessed with seeing. His idea of knowledge and senses are very vision focused. He's got a little bit of sound. I think there is some touch and smell, but he really sees uh, experience and senses being focused on image. And I noticed economy is a word that came up a lot
Yes.
here. I don't have a theory yet of how it's being used. Sort of like, is he building towards a theological economy, perhaps? And the image, like it's, and that's why my first beginning, like, last time we set up this of like, well, did you? I'm not sure you did. And there's almost much more of language we would expect in the first one of this one. There's a lot more about art. Occasionally art as an implied metaphor. Looking at 71 here, towards the top, the demand that the created image should resemble the original, which created it, is for Irenaeus an elementary demand on the creative artist who is God. And that there's a nice implication there of art is mimesis, which goes back to, to what extent does he have a fairly traditional view of art?
Right.
Yeah. What would he think of John Ashbery and some of the New York abstract painters?
Right. Well, he does. He mentions he identifies a few different major figures as Gnostics, right? He talks about William Blake. I think even what did you say? Wagner's operas are representative of Gnosticism because it's like people attempting to rescue Lady Wisdom or what have you, right? So. So it is clear, I guess he does have some kind of vision of art, what he wants to see from a particular project. He loves Claudel, right? He's bringing up Claudel a lot. So,
and I think Claudel came up in the last volume too.
Yes,
and that makes sense. Yeah, there's that he does a mini Irenaeus and like kind of going through sort of the Valentinian Gnostics and their beliefs. In some ways, I wonder how honest he is because it does seem so. He does make it sound so absurd. There's a very Rube Goldberg assemblage to his, which it is actually accurate. We know enough of the Neoplatism to know that thing goes down a weird rabbit hole very quickly.
Right. Yeah. One thing again I also appreciated in this, at least so far, in the introduction, he's kind of like, I am talking about these people. I'm not going to talk about these people, and I'm not doing it because I don't like them. It's just like I thought the figures I'm highlighting were more representative. I do wish, however, I thought it was interesting that he mentioned Soloviev. I think that guy is so interesting, and I kind of wish he talked about him.
It is an interesting group. I am personally looking forward to Dennis, or as we figured out last time, he is referring to more commonly known as Pseudo Dionysus or Dionysus the Areopagite. I'm looking forward to that chapter just because, even though it's not a terribly long chapter, or not the longest, which is what I would have expected, he does seem someone so central to a lot of his ideas. But at the same time, Dionysus can, or at least I feel, can be like being approaching Gnosticism,
right?
Gnosticism.
Well, he identified there's certain things he identified that struck me. Toward the end of the reading, I think he mentions how there's a bit of Platonism in the letter to the Hebrews, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that before, and I'm not. I'm sure people have. Like, I'm not by any means a scripture scholar, so I'm sure people way more well-read and more educated than me can talk about that. But I was like, oh, interesting. Again, I just had never heard somebody say that before, because I mean, again, we obviously don't know who wrote the letter to the Hebrews, but
And especially in the letter of the Hebrews, you would have expected to see it more writing to, some of the Greek communities,
right,
where he's got, because we can tell the difference in tone, when he's writing to the Hebrews, when he's writing to, Corinthians or Thessalonians. He super nicely writes the Ephesians. He digs those folks. Versus the Romans, and you think of the Hebrews as being much more legalistic, versus philosophical, which is implied to my mind by Platonic. So that did strike me. That I think the Romans got a brief mention too. That was mainly Hebrews, and they seem like the ones you would not expect. In the previous one, Paul was important. The Pauline journey, maybe he called it,
yeah,
because Paul was the first one to have this experience, this revelatory experiential knowledge of Christ without having met Christ fully embodied as a man on earth. And
right,
that was important. But he clearly had some issues with Paul, and I'm sympathetic because I sometimes, when I read Paul, I just I love you, man. I can't take this right now. I'm gonna put you away, and I'm gonna read something else. Sometimes it's just a twisted syntax. Other times of like, Paul, you're too hard on me. But he does 84. He talks about Abraham as the founder of Judaism, and then eventually Christianity. Through being the first to really find God. Begins earlier. I think looking at page 84, and this very much more natural. Even at the top, he talks about the natural law, though naturals in quotes, not natural law in quotes. But down the end, of course, the Pauline perspective is not absent. Law as conviction of sin, ostensio, as the establishment of a rule with the grace to keep it added only later, the tightening of legal. So this, Paul as being legalistic, versus the more experiential. And so I think this maybe goes to some of what his issue with Paul is, that and there you can see the Platonism maybe there, the sort of the the Neoplatonists, the Gnostics, and this weird structured thing here. We've got the archons here. We got this weird progression and all these little in between beings and worlds, and this I call it a Rube Goldberg structure. I can see Paul with his legalism, and versus the much more experiencing God and understanding God through a more revelatory experience.
yeah. I mean, I'll just say generally, I thought, in that section, I thought there were insights and connections that I don't think I've never seen before, and it's like, I'm not, again, I want to be clear here, like, I don't want to. I've been admitting my ignorance, right? Like, I'm sure there are people who've written about this, but the connection to Mary and Abraham was very interesting. That Mary, through the Magnificat, inherits Abraham's longing and exaltation. I thought that the connection between Mary and the birth of Christ was very interesting too, because he mentions how Adam was created from like virginal clay, whereas Christ
Terra Virgo. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was like really fascinating. And it's something in a general way that I've noticed that you know, the more you learn, I mean, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, right? That's not only true of theology, it's true of everything. But um, I found that in my own education as a Catholic and as just somebody who's just interested in these questions, I found that, when I undertake certain like studies, I'm able to see more connections. For instance, right, like I was watching a video um, put out by some people who were like Hasidic Jews, right, and they were talking about how God is hidden and you have to find him. And I immediately made a connection to the messianic secret in Mark, like Jesus is hidden, right, and he wants to remain hidden. He says, like, don't tell anybody what I did, right? So I thought, there are all these connections that you continue to make, and I just thought he did that so much here.
And one thing because I saw that, and because of some of the reading I've been doing, we have sort of Straussian figures, being fairly prominent in America intellectual climate right now. But he did kind of diverge into Straussian esotericism, which I am, I am highly suspect of. I think we can always understand more of great philosophers. I think hidden messages might be a bit much for me.
Right.
Yeah, but the section, the clay, and I'm uncomfortable with some of the language he used, defining intactness as being kind of key to Mary's virginity,
Right.
which is true in that case. But I don't like that concept for virginity intactness, which implies some biological stuff. Without going
Sure.
to detail
Yeah.
here, can be made unintact by falling on a bike.
Sure.
And he kind of, no pun intended, fell into a bit of that with his analogy. But where he went, we have with the comparison of Christ spitting on the ground to make clay and to heal the blind man. That was he didn't make it specific there, but that became almost a kind of there's a definite yin yang male female of sort of Christ impregnating that soil with and obviously spitting. Think of the mouth and the breath, the pneuma, and just sort of there's some wonderful imagery that he brought into that I had never seen before.
Yeah, and I thought that section was interesting too. It also reminds us as well that Adam has the multiple meanings, right? Like, because it's Adam, the name, but also that means man, right, in Hebrew, right? So when he says,
he played a lot with that.
No, he says Jesus approaches Adam with the clay, right? Like, and so that it reminds us that this is man, right? So Jesus is helping man see clearly, right?
There was formally 61 is something interesting, which I think he's taking. I think he's quoting from Irenaeus. This God is glorified by his word, which is the eternal Son, and by the Spirit, who is the wisdom of the Father of all. It's just kind of interesting, the Logos, rather than being like the Holy Spirit and the breath being Christ. And it's not fully, it kind of struck because there is, he does have, I think less so in the first time, some of the pneuma breath, specifically using that word coming through, which was, I found interesting. And sometimes I am not sure because of the different translator, what all is going on. But there are just some really interesting ideas that kind of come up, and you can definitely see how he is controversial. And I think he does do some CYA. I think some of the Irenaeus section is a little CYA of like, don't call me Gnostic. I'm not a Gnostic heretic.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean, again, I'd love to read about the response of these volumes at the time. It'd be interesting to see what people had to say. But yeah, I mean, I know that the part, something else that struck me too, and again, like I want to reiterate this again and again, right? Because I don't want anybody to say, well, how did you not know that or whatever. Like I'm revealing my ignorance here, for certain things. So, even the presentation of Christ's baptism was interesting to me and different because the way I always understood it was, Christ allows John to baptize him as a kind of model for us. That because obviously baptism, uh, you know, washes away our sins, and initiates us, or the beginning of the initiation into, um, the life of the church. But I think, yeah, I mean, he talked about how like, Christ is baptized so that the Spirit of God can kind of enter into things. So it's like, my understanding, the way at least I'm reading it is that again, this is an indicator of, the Holy Spirit kind of announcing, his presence. So it was again just very different from what I've seen before.
Because he always in history and embodied a certain kind of embodiedness or extension into history is so important to these ideas. And it made sense within that context to me of that there needs to be this historical intrusion,
Right.
For for the form. Word not used as much, but does come up. The form is still important.
Right.
This one, that the form depends upon historicism, not just historical context, but historical existence.
Right.
And I found one thing I was looking for is page 60. But God has communicated himself and made himself knowable, and this knowledge, parentheses, gnosis of God is real. An unapologetic use of the word gnosis within a chapter about the great critic of the Gnostics, and that is as real knowledge.
Right.
Indeed, the most real of all forms of knowledge, though it does not prejudice the unknowability of God. And that is still what I'm loving most about von Balthasar is, reaffirming my belief in the importance of gnosis and not Gnostic forms of knowledge,
Right.
small g Gnostic, as revelation, but implying something more than revelation. Maybe like revelation, and experienced, incorporated, and adopted into my historical context, into my historical existence to make it real. And there's some wonderful. I'm not going to try and find the section, but there is a bit, where this sort of knowledge. There is a wonderful take I felt on kind of the idea of knowledge. Sort of the traditional formulation of justified true belief. That he really, in making Gnostic revelatory knowledge so important, there is, something that needs to be done with the traditional Gnostic or the traditional epistemological formulation of justified true belief. Though I will take a moment to recommend Alvin Plantinga,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic philosopher, though not a Christian philosopher. Actually, I think he might be Calvinist. But anyway, I read one of his books on epistemology, warrant the current debate. Great title, because of course there was no debate until he wrote the book.
Right.
But he replaced justified with warrant.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason was justified has this normative thing to it, that warrant did not. That justified had a kind of moral implication to it. Of, if you're not justified, you've really effed up, versus something a little more of like, warranted, something that doesn't imply that normative aspect, that added something that didn't need to be added
Oh, yeah. No,
to the
definitely.
question of knowledge. And even though I said I'm not going to look for it, I'm still looking for it anyway. But I found that interesting, of kind of playing with that traditional formulation of justified true belief. Okay. Oh, here we are. 56. The first paragraph, or first breath begins on the page, second breath halfway down. But certainty and truth are only guaranteed if what supports God's revelation can really take the weight. And so the idea of taking the weight, that feels like, could be the same as justification or warrant. It could be like a fourth leg, but an interesting thing to add on to what is required for knowledge. And, sort of, are our structures sufficient to handle knowledge, enabling us to have it?
Right.
And, and revelation needing something more, which I'm kind of calling gnosis. It's there's something experiential. There is a structure we have built that enables us to turn revelation into legitimate, if non, in some extent, non-empirical, but maybe rational empirical, with a hyphen between the two to combine them, because there is something empirical about it if we are experiencing it, but distinguishing it from, just I see a highlighter.
Right.
Not empirical in that sense. Do you think we have a better idea of his aesthetics yet?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely want to keep reading. I do think I have a sense of his presentation. I mean, it's that, again, that started to become clear in volume one. I mean, I think this is really about seeing reality clearly, right? And again, the proper understanding of reality, right? Like capital R reality, not like lowercase reality, right? So again, I do see a lot in common here with like Benedict, Pope Benedict. That is, he made similar arguments. I believe von Balthasar influenced Benedict, right? I think, or in part.
I'd have to imagine. I mean, arguably two of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, or at least two of the most interesting.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It was our professor, James Matthew Wilson, who, said at the very least, Benedict is always interesting.
Yep.
The theologian. And Balthasar the same way. But yeah, his emphasis on the Ben's aesthetics seem to be more traditional aesthetics. And I think he's using aesthetics differently here. That it is something closer to epistemology, but he does want to use epistemology because he is pushing back against this, what I've now just called that rational-empirical knowledge, and aesthetics as this additional thing. Maybe that, ability to support the weight is what the aesthetics is. But obviously, as we read more, going to get a better idea.
Well,
what the heck you mean?
Well, I was curious, obviously if we see a word, right, that's being used in a way that is unusual, just made me think like this must be an older definition. So sure enough, I just looked it up. The term originates from the Greek word aesthetikos, meaning of sense perception. So obviously there is a relation there to like how we think of it now, right? Like what is pleasing and you know, how do we understand form, etc. But like sense perception, I think is important there because like I think so much of this is about sensing God and sensing creation and experiencing creation and human life in a way that perhaps is in danger of being lost in the modern age, and so on.
And also, I mean, you mentioned that he all throughout when you see quotes, you know, in a foreign language, it is almost invariably Greek,
Right.
ancient or New Testament Greek. He doesn't really go to the Latin very much. His point of view is through the lens, at least so far, of philosophers and theologians and patristic fathers who wrote in Greek. That is his touchstone. He doesn't so far, you know, really lean on the Latin. And I can't help but notice there is no Thomas Aquinas.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Here. And not that some of the others, I think Anselm wrote in Latin. I know Bonaventure did. You know, that he's is lenient on folks who have written in Latin. But there is something earlier about it, you know, and so and that doesn't really connect the apps Aquinas, just something that kind of struck me that Aquinas is left out.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I know next up is going to be Augustine, who doesn't have necessarily a long section, and I'm almost expecting him to be a little critical of Augustine. He certainly seemed critical in this one a little bit. That Augustine almost got us onto a wrong track. You know,
Yeah.
implied. I assume he's going to go back on that because it is Augustine, but.
Right. Yeah, I am also interested in seeing. And again, I might, you know, perhaps I'll have my disagreements here with von Balthasar because I really admire Augustine, right? You know, I very, you know, very nearly joined a community that follows the rule of Saint Augustine. So, you know, Augustine is a, you know, I don't know if I really have a patron saint, but like Augustine is probably the closest thing to a patron saint that I would have. So I'm interested to see.
And obviously, you know, His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, you know, now he's not anything except for the Pope, but he was the head of the Augustan order. So,
right.
You know, there are definitely, you know, having moments, including Sarah Rudin's, or no, that was on Virgil. Never mind. I'll say slim back. But anyway, never mind that. But yeah, Augustine, but no, still Augustine with Just War is coming up a lot. But I will say, after I read Augustine, I am most excited about Dennis or Dionysus. Completely pointless and inappropriate digression. Whenever I see him spell it, he spells it Denyys. Sure, completely appropriate. It just threw me off because I'm used to see it Dionysus or Dionysus. All I think of is old Key and Peele sketch with the substitute teacher, you know, calling out the names like D nice. Was D nice? You mean Denise? I'm like, don't make me get mad. And so I think of D nice when I see it in von Balthasar.
That's funny.
Any final thoughts?
No, I'm excited to continue reading and see what he has to say with Augustine. Again, those who are listening to this, if you're nervous about reading this, you know, you actually don't even really have to read volume 1. You can just start with this, and you'll I think probably be able to understand it.
If nothing else, I am proof that foundational ignorance of the subject matter should not bar you from trying to read this.
Right.
All right. Well, I will see you soon. I hope to see folks as we do second section, Augustine, of the second volume.
Sounds good. Thank you, Christopher. Thanks, everybody.